This video will outline the basic structure of the analysis section of your chemistry IA. We can break down this section into four main parts: data collection, processing of data, consideration of uncertainty, and the presentation of data. Let's have a look at data collection first. This can be broken down into two subsections: qualitative data and quantitative data. The qualitative data section might refer to observations you make during your experiment that could be relevant to your final evaluation. You might, for example, notice that the white chemical you've produced in your reaction actually has a little bit of a brown tinge to it. And in this example, this might suggest that there are impurities present which would have an impact on the mass of the substance that you've produced. And depending on what you're investigating, this could influence the accuracy of your result. The quantitative data is a record of the measurements that you made during your experiment. And to present these measurements in a concise scientific manner, we normally put them in a table. We need column or row headings, and in those headings we also want units and absolute uncertainties for those measurements. It's also important to check that the decimal places in your measurements match the decimal places in your uncertainties. This is also a good point to identify any anomalies so that they can be removed before you process your data. Let's now consider the processing of your data. This subsection is where you'll complete any relevant calculations, and the important point here is to show one example calculation for each step of the processing. And in each of these steps, you want to make sure to check the decimal places or significant figures depending on the calculations you're doing. It's also helpful to explicitly state what you're doing and why. And to do so, you'll want to state any formulas or equations that are being used. Let's now move on to the consideration of uncertainty subsection. As your quantitative data will all have uncertainties, this is where we need to consider how they are propagated through your calculations in order to consider the total percentage uncertainty in the final values produced. To do this effectively, I would work through each step of your example calculations in the previous subsection and consider how the uncertainties are involved as you move through them. And you may want to check out the separate video on the propagation of uncertainty if you're not sure how to do this. Let's now consider the final subsection, which is the presentation of data. The first part here might be a table of your processed data, including the uncertainties. And the second step in most IAs will be to present this data in the form of a graph. A good graph will have a clear descriptive title, labelled axes with units, and a trend line instead of a dot-to-dot line. Following the graph, it's also quite useful to include a short summary that outlines the relationship of what your graph is showing. In summary, these are the four important subsections to include in the analysis part of your chemistry IA: data collection, processing of data, consideration of uncertainty, and presentation of data. Hopefully this video was of some help.